joined on the Crispin Flintoff show by Craig Murray out there in Lebanon. How are you doing, Craig?
Yeah, not bad. Been chasing President Macron around today, trying to ask him questions, but didn't succeed, unfortunately.
But you've not only been out and about, you've written a really amazing blog that I'll just show the front page of here. Ceasefire is not an end up. I would urge people to subscribe to Craig Murray's blog and also maybe donate because you are looking to keep going in Lebanon. But you've written it here in this blog. The genocide of the Palestinian people began 76 years ago. What may be drawing to a close is merely a particularly intense phase in the genocide. Gaza is destroyed. 92% of its housing is gone. Its water treatment and sanitation, electricity generation, food processing, farming, and fishing are all now incapable of sustaining much life. Its hospitals, health centres, universities, colleges, and schools are all now destroyed, as are its municipal buildings, waste disposal, road surfaces, drainage channels, theatres, cultural centres, cinemas, cafes. You go on to talk more about that, but I mean, you've put it all there really in the first two paragraphs that this ceasefire is not really much to be joyful about, is it?
No, it's not, sadly. It may hopefully represent a slowdown in the killing, but first, it won't be a complete ceasefire. I have no doubt that Israel will continue to bomb and kill within Gaza when it wishes to, using the excuse that Hamas is terrorist, therefore its counter-terrorism operation, whatever the ceasefire agreement says. And also, I have no doubt that Israel will not respect the provisions for allowing aid into Gaza and will continue to restrict and harass and cut down on what's getting through to people who are living in terrible, insanitary conditions which can barely sustain life. And Israel will be depending on disease and starvation to carry on, if you like, to continue the genocide after any apparent ceasefire. I think the notion that Israel is actually going to allow 600 trucks of aid a day into Gaza is just not going to happen, unfortunately.
Hmm. And I mean, the other thing is, would they let journalists in? I mean, you'd be good to go there and find out what's going on there. You can't see any likelihood that Israel would allow journalists back in there, do you?
I think it's very unlikely, certainly for a long time. It's conceivable they may allow some people in under strict Israeli army censorship and supervision. And at some stage, I think we probably will get some token BBC crocodile tears sympathizing over injured Palestinian children or something. We're going to see that at some stage down the line. But of course, the damage is done, and the media will never ever live down its appalling complicity in the genocide in the way that it reported the genocide from Tel Aviv under the rules of Israeli military censorship and promoting ludicrous Israeli propaganda memes like the Hamas headquarters under the Al Shifa hospital, which of course never existed, and those kind of things. So, but personally, yes, of course, I I will get into Gaza as soon as I can and get into the West Bank as soon as I can. Though my immediate focus at the moment is on getting into Damascus. There's still plenty to do here in Lebanon, but I'm very keen to get to Damascus because at the moment there's no reporting there's no Western reporting on the new regime in Syria, which isn't totally sycophantic and which isn't hiding the truth about what's happening in that country to an extraordinary degree.
Yeah. Um, Now, you mentioned that I mean this whole this ceasefire. I mean, how do you think this was brokered? This ceasefire. How do you think that it came about? What's your knowledge on that?
I don't really have any inside knowledge, but my reading of it is that basically Trump's people told Netanyahu he had to sign up because it is no different to the ceasefire deal that's been on the table for the last 9 months. And Netanyahu simply didn't agree to it while Biden was in power, which just goes to show Biden didn't try to make him agree to it. The Americans had the ability to enforce a ceasefire anytime they wished, and they chose not to do so. But that whole narrative of Biden leaning on, or Blinken leaning on Netanyahu to be less vicious or less intent on genocide was always false. The Americans were entirely part and parcel of this genocide from day one. Obviously, the Trump administration don't think continuing with genocide is helpful at this stage, and so we're now seeing a change of position.
And well, I mean, with Trump, I mean, a lot's been said about his influence, like you just said about his influence on this. I mean, what's your take on him? I mean, you in your blog you say you find it hard to work out what's going on with him.
It is very hard to work out. Certainly in 2016, he was the lesser of two evils. Had Hillary Clinton been elected, she would have completely laid waste to Syria in the same way she just laid waste to Libya while Secretary of State, and was, extremely hawkish and very, very keen to project war overseas. And we've seen, the Biden administration are up to their elbows in the blood of Palestinians and in the most detailed complicity in the genocide. And Trump is a conundrum because while he always appears more isolationist and more pacific in foreign policy terms, then at the same time, he appoints the most terrible people into the key positions, people who are the most extreme hawks, and he declares himself to be 100% pro-Israel. And of course, it was he who decided to symbolically move the US embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. And, all the signs are that we could be in for a very difficult time after his inauguration. But then his actions often belie his rhetoric, and why he doesn't say things because they're true or because they're what he believes. He says things because they're what help him politically at that moment in time. And actually, it's not at all impossible that we will find that Trump de-escalates things with Iran, for example, which, whereas most people from his rhetoric have expected the opposite to be the case. It's almost impossible to read the man, it really is.
There's this issue of Greenland where he's saying he wants to buy Greenland.
Yeah, I mean, this is extraordinary, isn't it? You've got, of course, the geostrategic position of Greenland between the United States and Russia, which make it of great military interest to the United States. But of course, much more important is the fact that with climate change and the ice cap disappearing or thinning, the minerals of Greenland, including a lot of highly valuable rare earth minerals, it's believed, become available for commercial exploitation for the first time. And so that's really, I think, the major goal here. But this is an interesting one. Obviously, I do not in the least favor the United States taking over Greenland. But on the other hand, nor do I favor the European Union nor Danish position. The Danish history of colonial exploitation of Greenland is deeply shameful. Hitler, in fact, directly quotes the Danish example of practicing eugenics and forced sterilization of the Inuit people as an inspiration for some of his racial policies. And that continued, and right through into the 1960s and the 1970s. There were still forced removals of Inuit children from their parents and taking them to mainland Denmark to be adopted against their parents' will. There was still forced sterilization of Inuit young women in the 1960s. That may have continued even longer, I'm not certain. So the Danish history of colonial exploitation of Greenland has been appalling. And there are an awful lot of the local population, the native population of Greenland, which is tiny. We're talking 30,000 people, which I'm not at all happy with, with Danish rule. And they should have the right of self-determination, free of interference from anyone, free of interference from Denmark or the United States or anybody else. But the European Union position, if you like, that Trump, keep your hands off. Greenland is Danish. Greenland is European. Well, it's not European. It's not in Europe, and it only belongs to a European Union state because it's a colony, and it's one of the worst examples of colonial exploitation. In fact, I believe it's true in saying, given how small the Inuit population is, that the forced removal of children by the Danes was probably the biggest ever forced removal of children in colonial history of the world as a percentage of the population of the local populations, a percentage of population, the number of children who were taken away. This was probably as bad as anything in colonial history.
The thing is that Trump's coming in, and there's a lot of uncertainty because not only have we got the Middle East there, we've got Greenland, we've got Chagos Islands, then we've got Eastern Europe seems to be going through some difficulties with NATO countries trying to impose or stop elections, for example, or possible assassinations of some of the leaders there. Is that a separate block to Trump? I mean, because I can't work out the EU's NATO kind of alliance, and then Trump, does he go into the EU alliance? I don't know if he is with EU countries, is he?
I don't think he is. I don't think, if you like, the EU/NATO dominance of Eastern Europe is an important tactical necessity to Trump if he can get good trading relations with Russia. I think he's probably prepared to do it that way. I don't think he's too bothered about this kind of ideological Iron Curtain way of looking at East and West. And what's happening is very scary at the moment, because obviously there's a great deal of disillusionment with the Western model and the results of the Western model. And we all know that in Western societies, there's a massively increasing wealth gap. We're all seeing that. And the model of Western democracy is failing. It's failing to deliver governments that are responsive to the people. And you're seeing a reaction to that in Western Europe, and you're seeing governments as in Hungary and Slovakia, which are not following the NATO EU play script. And you're seeing countries like Romania and Moldova and candidate states for the EU like Georgia, you're seeing them want to move back towards the Russian orbit. And you're seeing blatant interference. The elections in Romania have just been cancelled because the wrong person won. That's quite extraordinary. A pro-peace, candidate who's against the war in Ukraine. Now, there are aspects of that gentleman's beliefs that I don't agree with myself. He's something of a cultural nationalist, but he won the election. You can't cancel the election on completely bogus grounds, frankly, of Russian interference, even if the things which were said to have happened were true, and I don't believe they were, but even were they true, there's no way that they are of sufficient significance to justify the cancelling of an election. A little bit of social media influence, effectively, whereas elections are all about social media influenced by everybody. So this attempt to cut down in Moldova, we saw blatantly rigged elections in order to get a referendum on the European Union through and a presidential election through. In Georgia, you have a refusal to accept the result of the election again because it ended up in an anti-EU, anti-NATO candidate winning. Now, as with Trump, exactly the same as with Trump, a lot of his people who are winning are not people with whom you and I are naturally aligned because they are part of right-wing populism. They're more aligned with, if you like, Nigel Farage and Reform than they are with you and I. But they are not part of the neoliberal consensus. And the neoliberal consensus is showing it is simply not prepared to accept election results or referendum results if they move away, and especially if they question this division between NATO, EU, and Russia, and the desire to restart the Cold War or even move towards World War III that we've been seeing lately.
I mean, just to finally, I mean, Starmer has just announced that he's going to give support to Ukraine for the next 100 years, billions of pounds, and also to say that he'll be supporting Ukraine with army, with people on boots on the ground. This is just before Trump's coming into power. Is that part of it? Are they trying to get these things put in before he comes into power to kind of undermine his possible deal with Putin, or to make sure that that conflict continues? What's your take on what Starmer's the timing of what Starmer's done? Because he could have thought about any other issue. He goes over to Ukraine to do that in the last few days before Trump. What do you think of that?
There's a lot of this. I mean, Biden forced through in the last week or two a $20 billion weapons package for Ukraine. And again, the aim was to get that to before Trump comes into power. It won't work, of course, because such things Trump, if he so wishes, can just cancel once he's in power. And the same goes with Keir Starmer's 100-year Reich or whatever it's called. The notion that the delusion of grandeur involved in saying, I am initiating a 100-year policy when your successor can just cancel it anytime they want if they don't agree with it. Keir Starmer cannot mandate what people who are not yet born, what my great-grandchildren, the policy they're going to follow towards Ukraine is not going to be set by this total loser prime minister we have at the moment. So I think we should all just sort of feel gently sorry for Keir Starmer. But yes, it is an attempt to paint Trump into an existing series of relationships. But it's not going to really have any effect. It's a bit pathetic, to be honest. And unfortunately for him and for Zelensky, the facts on the ground are getting worse and worse every day. The Russians are advancing faster in Ukraine than they have at any stage in the war, and there is, I think, going to be a peace deal fairly quickly in Ukraine after Trump comes in. I think that is something he will do. I think he will seek to more normalize relations with Russia as part of a bid to more normalize world energy markets. That's also why I think he may actually move towards more normalization with Iran as well, because I think his business mind will take over there. But yeah, I think these attempts to box Trump in will come to look as silly and futile as they are fairly quickly.